Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of the Brand Burger Podcast. I'm your host, Braden Matson, Senior Strategist at Storybook Marketing. Today, we are going back to 101. We're going back to the bottom of marketing to cover some foundational things that I think are actually very important and often not talked about. In other words, we're talking fundamentals today. We're going to cover essentially what marketing is fundamentally, what marketing does, why it does those things, and then how to measure the things that marketing does. This is, like I said, a very important topic that I think a lot of marketers, myself included, don't actually, or at least at some point, I didn't know these things. And so I think that a lot of marketers don't know these things because, as data from Marketing Week would seem to suggest, about 54%, in other words, the majority of marketers are actually untrained. And again, I was in that category at one point. And when I was in that category, I just didn't know these things. And so this, I think, is just incredibly valuable for everyone in the field. So, to start off, what is marketing? Sounds almost like a silly question. We all know what it is, right? Well, in some cases, I think you're going to get different answers depending on who you ask, which is fine as long as the answers hit on what is essentially the same thing. And so, marketing is a function in a business and a discipline, right? So, it's both of those things. There's a lot of functions in a business, like sales. You could say sales is a discipline. But marketing is a function in a business and a discipline that is concerned with identifying and satisfying customer needs profitably. Okay, so it's concerned with identifying, that's or the research part that we're going to talk about, identifying and then satisfying. The satisfying part is product. Okay, so identifying is research, satisfying is product, customer needs, right? Again, that's just market orientation. Profitably, which is the part where you make money. Okay, so marketing is about fundamentally figuring out what people need and want, then creating products or services that meet those needs and then communicating, that's advertising, communicating, marketing communications, delivering, that's distribution, and exchanging, also distribution, in a way that makes your company money. So marketing is a function in a business and a discipline that's concerned with identifying and satisfying its customer needs profitably. It's about figuring out what people need and want, creating those products or services to meet those needs and wants, and then communicating, delivering, and exchanging them in a way that makes your company money profitably. That's what marketing is at a very just foundational level. So, given that that's what marketing is, let's then move on to what marketing actually does. I think there are different ways to frame this, but I really love the way that Mark Ritson puts this in terms of a process that involves different pillars. I also think that this way of thinking about it is pretty congruent with the last 100 or so years of marketing. Of course, different things arise at different periods in time, but there are fundamentals, and I think that this is part of those fundamentals. So what does marketing do? The first thing I'm going to say here before going through this is that ideally this is in fact a process that has an order that should be followed because an order is really important, and we're going to talk more about why the order is so important. But firstly, what does marketing do? Now, this should actually be step one, which is essentially being customer oriented, being market oriented. So the step one of the marketing process is to actually take a seat of humility to understand that you don't know anything and your customer has all the answers. I think it was Sam Walton who said that the customer has all the answers and they have all the money. That might be a misquote, but I think that I'm right, or I think that I'm remembering that correctly. The point is that the customer defines market needs and market demand. Okay. Market demand is a function of human needs and desires and values interacting with the environment. It's why the demand for Peloton increased during the pandemic. Peloton didn't do anything to create the demand. The demand increase is a function of those variables in the environment interacting with each other. Okay, so the step one, the absolute bedrock here is to go into this saying, I seek to understand that, not tell it what's true. Okay, the job of a good marketer, an excellent marketer, fundamentally, the first job, I should say, marketer has many jobs, but the first job of an exceptional marketer is to say, I seek to understand people and the market and their needs, not to build products and then shove them down their throats and say, this is what you want, right? That is bad marketing. So step one is to, as Mark Ritson has said, turn the lights out and start from a place of, I don't know anything. The second thing that marketing does then is research. I suppose you could say that the first thing it does is actually not something it does. It's more of a mindset. So like the starting point is the mindset of being customer oriented and letting the market tell you things. And then the first step then, in other words, what you do with that perspective is you do research of some kind. So research is the first thing that marketing does. Research basically aims to understand purchase drivers, so attitudes, behaviors, what people want, what people do, where people shop. All of those insights are important to understand how to actually develop a product. Because remember, marketing is in fact a process that should, in a perfect world, start with research, not the product. Often it starts with the product regardless, but the marketing process ideally actually starts before the product is developed. And so I think the best framework for thinking about research is the jobs to be done theory. You can just Google that or YouTube it. There's a lot of really great resources and content there concerned with it. But fundamentally, the jobs to be done framework is getting at people hire a product to do a job. And the whole point of research is to uncover the job that a person is trying to do when they buy or hire a product. So with research, fundamentally, you have two forms of research here. So you have qualitative and quantitative research. Qualitative should be done first because what you learn from qualitative should be fed into quantitative. In other words, the things you learn with qualitative are then validated mathematically and statistically with quantitative. So there's an order there that's important. Okay, so qualitative research is things like customer interviews, focus groups, ethnography. Google that. There are varying places and costs associated with doing qualitative research, and you should do whatever is the most affordable depending on your context. So if you're a startup, you're probably not going to spend 10, $20,000 doing focus groups. And in fact, you can even do some of this research synthetically with AI potentially. I mean, be careful, but that's an emerging phenomenon. So qualitative research is where you are uncovering the qualities of your market, and you do that by interacting with people in some way, whether it's focus groups, ethnography, customer interviews, jobs to be done interviews, etc. Then the things that you learn from qualitative research are fed into quantitative research. Usually, this is going to be something like a survey, right, of some kind. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole now because we could spend a lot of time talking about surveys and how to properly survey and survey questions and stuff like that. But the point here is we're broad strokes defining here what marketing does. Okay, and the first part of what marketing does is research. That's really where it should start. And you can always do a bit of research no matter the budget. Even if you have no budget, you can give people $20 gift cards, just talk to them. You can talk to potential prospects. Even if you don't have a single customer, you can still do research. It's the first thing that I did when I stepped into director at Client Boost formerly. The first thing I did was set up customer interviews and I did research and they were incredibly valuable. Okay, those interviews. So there's never an excuse not to do research. So that's the first step broadly. The second thing that marketing does after research fundamentally is marketing strategy. So there are different ways to formulate or conceptualize strategy, but I think one way to think about this that's really helpful is just where to play and how to win. Okay, so here's how I would say this. Strategy is the map, tactics are the car, measurement is the GPS. Okay, so strategy is telling you ultimately what you're going to do. Tactics are how you're going to do that, and measurement is telling you whether you're doing it correctly or not, whether you're on the right track. The reason that tactics come after strategy, which we will talk about, is that if strategy is the map and you have a car, if you don't know where you're going, you need the map. Now, what most companies do is they spend a lot of money on really nice cars. Okay? Most companies spend $500,000 on a supercar, but they don't have a map, and the supercar just drives off a cliff really fast, right? And all the other companies with Toyota Corollas who also don't have maps drive off the same cliff, they just do it slower. Okay, so the reason that the place of tactics after strategy is so key is that if strategy is the map, it's going to tell you where to go. The map doesn't do things. The car does things. The map doesn't do anything. It tells you. It tells you what you're going to do and where to go. But tactics are the thing that actually get you there. Because you have strategy, where to play, how to win. Where to play means where in the market are we going to focus? Okay, so where to play fundamentally is who are we targeting? What market segments? Are we targeting the whole market? Are we building brand to everyone? And then are we targeting segments, right? In other words, are we taking a bothist approach, or are we going to use sophisticated mass marketing and just target the entire market? Are we going to target one segment or two segments? That's the first question that strategy answers is targeting. And there's a lot that goes into that. I think that segmentation plays a role here, but ultimately, the targeting question is also a financial one. Dale Harrison has a really good post about this on LinkedIn where he makes the case that targeting and segmentation, targeting and positioning is actually a financial strategy. It's a financial differentiation strategy, or the differentiation is actually a financial strategy, because in a huge market, you might be better to find a place where you're the obvious choice so that you can stack those segments. Shout out shout out to Drew, segment stacking, right? But this is the point. First part of strategy fundamentally is where are you playing? That also has to do then with things like geographies, obviously, right? When we're talking about targeting geographies, uh, the products that you are going to promote, right? So the first part of strategy, where to play, is concerned with where in the market you're going to focus over what period of time. The second piece there is how to win. And you can think of how to win as positioning and objectives and then the tactical set, right? Or you could think of how to win just fundamentally as positioning and objectives. But the point there is when you have where to play, which is your market, and then how to win, this is going to be positioning and distinctiveness. And then you could include the tactical set in that too. So where to play and how to win is one way to formulate a strategy. The second way to think about a strategy is your targeting, your positioning, and your objectives. Mark Ritson frames it this way, and I think this is just a fantastic way to think about strategy as well, which is fundamentally, if you know who you're targeting, you know how you're positioned against those targets, whether it's the full market or segments or both, and then how you are like I said, positioned to those, and then what your objectives are. In other words, you can have revenue level objectives, you can have pipeline or awareness level objectives, but the point is you have OKRs, you have SMART objectives, you have goals, right? So I think that is another great way to think about what a strategy is. But fundamentally, strategy, again, is the map. It's saying where you're going to go, right? And then tactics are the things you do to get you there. But strategy is where to play, how to win, or it's targeting, positioning, objectives. But I think those are two really good ways to think about it. The thing that I'll say here too about strategy is that it is a ruthless focus at the expense of everything else you could do. So the more that you focus, the more of a strategy you have. Now you can be too focused, but the point is that strategy necessitates focus. Strategy presupposes focus. If you do not have focus, you don't have a strategy. It's that simple. The reason is because in order to make a positive claim about what you're doing, you can't do a whole bunch of other stuff because that other stuff will contradict the stuff you're doing. So if you're doing something, you're not doing 99% of other stuff, right? Like right now, I am focused on recording this podcast with 100% of my attention. I'm not playing video games. I'm not watching Netflix. I'm not at the gym, right? Like there's a massive, massive, massive list of a whole bunch of other stuff that I am not doing in this moment right now because I'm focused. That's what focus means. If you have focus, I have a strategy. My strategy with this is I have notes and I know when I'm going to be done. And I know what done looks like and I know what I'm going to do and I know what I'm going to do after. Okay, so that's what strategy means. It's focus. It's also sacrifice. If you're not sacrificing, you don't have a strategy. Again, too many companies drive the car, the super nice car, off the cliff super quickly, but they didn't know where they were going. They didn't have the map, they didn't have the strategy. And so they just take a long time to get off the cliff, but the nicer the car, the faster they get off the cliff. Okay, so that's the number two here is marketing does strategy. That's the second piece of this. So research one, then in a perfect world, research should feed strategy, which we just talked about. And then finally, from strategy is tactical execution. Sun Tzu said famously, I think in, is it The Art of War? I haven't read it. I think it's The Art of War, where he says that tactics before strategy are the noise before defeat. Then he also said, sorry, tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. Then he did also say something about strategy without tactics. The point is do both. The point is do both and do them in the right order. Tactics must come from strategy. Tactics must be the coffee that comes from the coffee grounds of strategy. There's an order to this. You can't make coffee without actually having the ground beans first. It's not going to work. You just put water through a filter and all you're going to get is water. It's going to be hot. You can think that it's coffee, but it's not. The point is there's an order here. And again, there's an order because if strategy is the map and the car is tactics, tactics are the things you do to get you from point A to point B. Tactics are not what point A to point B looks like. Tactics are how are we getting there? Okay, so fundamentally the tactical set is the four P's, right? We should all be familiar with these, despite the fact that a lot of marketers couldn't name them without looking it up. But four P's being product, price, place, promotion. In other words, product, pricing, distribution, and advertising. Okay, they're just the four P's because it's nicer to frame them of in that way. And the original author of the four P's wanted to do it that way, just because there's alliteration there. It's easier to say. But the point is product, price, place, promotion. Okay, so the tactical set, four P's, is really what CMOs should be owning, as well as the other components. Or maybe you have an organization big enough where the VP is owning the four P's and the CMO owns the entire process of research strategy in the four P's. But the point is the four P's are the tactical set, which means that the product is actually a tactic. It's part of tactics. And the reason is because the product is involved directly in driving revenue. It's the thing that's exchanged for monetary value, right? Price is also a tactic because the more you price, the more profitable you are. It has a direct impact once again on revenue. Same thing with distribution and of course advertising. Okay, so tactics and the tactical set are downstream from strategy because the strategy tells you what to do and the tactics tell you are going to be how you do it. You cannot do this the other way around. And the thing that I've said before that I will say once again is that the success of your tactical execution is contingent on how good your strategy is. And the reason is because if you're targeting the wrong people, you're positioned in a poor way, and you don't have distinctiveness, you haven't plotted out what your brand positioning is, you haven't plotted out your product positioning, you don't have clear delineation between brand positioning, product positioning. You haven't done any segmentation. You don't know who you're targeting. There is nowhere to play, right? Like all of the strategic pieces, if you don't have that, the probability, think of this like probability, the probability that your tactical execution is just going to get it right is massively low compared to if you spend a whole lot of time doing strategy well. Strategy's de-risking tactics. Okay. And it's just incredible that a lot of organizations just default to doing tactics, partly because, or largely because, arguably, marketing just gets defined in this way where all marketing is just ads. Marketing is just the promotional department, but marketing is not just advertising. Okay. And so the point here is that Strategy de-risks tactics massively because, like I said, the odds that your tactics are just going to fall in the right order if you just do them without a strategy it's next to impossible. And I think this contributes to the fact that not that many companies grow. There are other things that feed into that, but Kantar has some data there. The point is, a lot of companies don't grow. They don't. And I think a big reason of that is that they actually don't have a growth strategy or just strategy. If you're doing strategy right, you should grow. So I'm not going to call it a growth strategy because that's just redundant and we don't need another word in this industry. But the point there is tactics come downstream from strategy, and tactics fundamentally are the four P's. Most marketers just think of the fourth P, which is promotion, right? The advertising part. I've also seen it as a third P, but in any case, promotion, advertising, communications is about 8% of the total marketing discipline. Okay, so again, tactics are the third set, and that's the third thing that marketing does. With that, let's get into now why marketing does it. So far we have covered what is marketing. Okay, what does marketing do? We just finished covering that. Now, why does marketing do it, right? So here's a really good way to think about this. Shout out again, Dale Harrison, which is that marketing's job is to create or bring about a version of the future that would have otherwise not occurred were it not for marketing. The other way to say this is that marketing's job is to create incremental future value. Let's break down all of those things. Firstly, incremental. So incremental just means causal. It means on top of what would have otherwise happened. Okay, so baseline is here. Incremental means the stuff above. Incremental means if if we didn't do this thing, the top part wouldn't be here. Okay, so it means causal. It means on top of. Incremental budget means more budget than you would have had. Okay, so incremental means causal, meaning that it would have not happened without marketing's activities. Future just means some point, not now. Okay, so I mean, future literally just means at some point in time that is not the moment that is now. So you launch a campaign. Future means we might see revenue in 10 minutes. We might see revenue in 5 years. We might see revenue longer than that, right? That could be tied in some way, conceptually at least, to a campaign. Future just means some point, not now. Value, now this is where it gets interesting because value comes in different forms, and this is why the people who are saying that ROI is a bad measure of many marketing activities, not because marketing shouldn't drive positive return, but because ROI is purely a financial metric that relies on being able to associate a specific monetary value with marketing activities. And the problem with that is that value comes in different forms, not just revenue. This is so freaking important. The value that marketing drives comes in forms that are not just revenue directly. Examples of this, right? So number one, in a B2B context, shout out Mark Stuess here. I'm just like dropping a lot of people who say really smart things in this episode. Marketing is a non-linear multiplier of sales performance in a B2B context. Okay, I'll say that again. Marketing is a non-linear, super key, multiplier. Okay, so 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 3 to 4 of sales performance. In other words, marketing helps sales sell more faster. Marketing has leverage, sales does not in a B2B context. The point there is that that value driver is a multiplier of sales. It's not necessarily just a revenue number. So that's just one way in which marketing drives value. Now, of course, that results in revenue. Okay, I'm not saying it doesn't. This is where the nuance is, and this is where the devil's in the details. And we're not just going to get to fall back on ROI though, because again, there's a difference between ROI and positive return. What I'm talking about here is marketing spends money that creates value, but not all of that value is only in a revenue number. Okay, so the second way that marketing creates value, I'm just going to list them off here, of course, is incremental revenue. So marketing does drive incremental revenue, and you can measure that with ROI in the short term. Okay, but here I'm talking about the ways in which marketing drives value. Revenue is one of them, it's not all of them. Another one here is ability to price higher. Okay, pricing power, which is driven by brand. You can't measure pricing power with ROI in a reliable way. You just can't do it, okay? But marketing's value, a lot of what brand marketing does, or at least being a more salient and mentally available brand, is that you can price higher. If you can price higher, you have pricing power. What that means technically is if you can price more, if you can increase your prices without it having a negative effect on profitability, you have pricing power. Brand is the main driver of that. Okay, but you can't measure that directly with ROI. Profitability is another thing. Okay, and profitability happens via higher pricing power or more pricing power and lower cost to acquire a customer, which are functions of strong brand. Again, you can't measure this directly with ROI. Asset value. In other words, the value of the business to shareholders. This again is largely a function of brand, right? Companies that haven't built brand, and I don't mean just like emotional TV ads. It's a holistic thing here when we're talking about brand, but the value of a company as an intangible asset is directly tied to brand. It's directly tied. Okay, so the value of that asset, the value of that intangible asset is the brand. That value to shareholders, again, is driven largely by brand, which in this way, as it relates to this specific value that marketing is driving, is not directly measurable via ROI. Higher conversion rates. I'm just going to bang through some of these. Higher conversion rates, faster sales cycles, bigger AOVs, and bigger ACVs. All of these help marketing or help sales sell more faster. All of those things, they help to increase profitability, lower sales cycles, make you more money, do it more effectively, do it more efficiently. So marketing, again, just to zoom out here, because I know that there might be people listening to this or watching this who are like, yeah, but you're still not missing the point. There has to be an ROI. ROI is different from positive return, okay, or return on value. ROI is purely a financial metric. It's a great metric, okay, but it's purely a financial one that does not measure all of the value marketing provides. Okay. ROI is really important, but ROI and positive return are different. And the way that marketing drives value cannot be measured entirely with ROI. There's parts of the value that marketing can drive or that marketing drives. Part of that value can be measured with ROI. That's great, particularly the short-term direct response. But many of the other ways that marketing drives value cannot be functionally or accurately measured with ROI. It does not mean there isn't positive return. It does not mean that marketing doesn't drive value that is higher than it costs to produce. And by the way, no one is saying otherwise. No one, at least no one worth listening to, is saying that marketing shouldn't drive positive return or more value. In other words, incremental value, incremental future value, which is what I said at the top of this section. No one is saying otherwise. Just to make that like super, super clear, like, can we put an end to this conversation? It's quite straightforward. ROI is a great metric, but it cannot be functionally used to calculate all of the value that marketing produces because marketing's value is contingent on other functions in the business, and marketing's job is to create incremental future value to the business. And there's lots of different ways it does that. Some of those ways can be measured with ROI, some of them can't. That's it. Like, that's it. That's how this works. And again, just to like hammer this nail as far into the coffin as I possibly can, ROI is different from positive return. They're different things. Positive return of value is different from ROI. One is a thing that happens in the world, one is a measure. Different things. Okay. With that, that is a perfect segue into the last section here, which is how marketing is measured. Okay, so we've covered what marketing is, we've covered what marketing does. We've now also covered why marketing does what it does, and now we're going to cover how to measure marketing. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't say that there's going to be more to this than I'm going to cover, but I'm going to hit on like the highest level pieces that I think are really important. As I said in the last section around why marketing does what it does, marketing is measured with more than one metric. I didn't say exactly that, but I said that the value that marketing provides comes in many different forms. And so because it comes in different forms, it just seems to logically follow anyway that marketing is measured then with more than one metric. Okay. And these metrics can be categorized roughly as short term, long term, and then you could also include expansion or post-purchase metrics here too. Here, I'm going to focus on short term and long term, just because for the most part, that is where the value is with respect to non-buyers and light buyers. So marketing can be measured with more than one metric. And here I'm going to categorize or break those down into short-term buckets. In other words, these are your demand metrics and your long-term metrics. These are brand metrics. Okay. And because here at Storybook, and if you followed me or Liam or anyone else, um, who is on the brand marketing train, what we're saying is you need to do both because that's where the most profitability is going to be. Most profitability is going to come from doing long-term stuff with the majority of your budget and short-term stuff at the same time. So let's just separate those out with respect to how marketing is measured so we can talk about what metrics you can use to evaluate these buckets. So firstly, with respect to the short-term activities, right? In other words, your demand gen or your direct response performance marketing below the line. There's a lot of different ways to say it. They all mean the same thing. Spoiler alert, we never needed the term demand gen, but here we are. Okay, so number one on the list, ironically, is I'm going to throw a bone to a lot of you out there is ROI. Okay, so return on investment, I think, is a reliable metric for short-term activities. It's not perfect, but nothing's perfect, right? If you're running direct response Google Ads or direct response social, which is buy this thing now because it's short term and because you can more easily assign a causal relationship between the advertising or the direct response effort and a return. You can more easily use ROI here. It's relatively reliable in my opinion. I have yet to be convinced otherwise. In other words, you spent this much on Google Ads over here, you got this much out. It's pretty straightforward. Yes, brand plays into that massively, but the point here is with respect to the short term, you can measure it with ROI in a lot of cases. The second thing here, a second metric to use for short-term demand marketing or direct response is incremental revenue pipeline leads, which is essentially again, incremental being causal, which is the additional effects, the additional value in the form of revenue pipeline or leads uh, driven in a specific period by a specific platform, campaign, product, etc. Okay, so again, we're thinking short term here, and you can use incremental value driven as a direct result of those short term things. The other one here, again, just being direct response impact on things like leads, MQLs, SQLs, pipeline value. Okay, so in the short term, you can use those metrics to measure short term performance. Those are your demand metrics, your direct response metrics, and you should be using those. You should have those in a dashboard somewhere. Okay. The second bucket here, though, which the majority of your budget, at least according to Bennett and Field, as well as like just logical deduction based on the 95/5 rule, should get the majority of your budget, okay, is long-term brand metrics. Okay, so here there's lots of other metrics that you can use. One is baseline revenue. Okay, so if your non-incremental revenue, in other words, the revenue that you generate both in a B2B and B2C context, that is not directly attributable to advertising or promotional efforts. In other words, the amount of money that your business makes that can't be tied to those things is increasing. It's a very good indicator and measure of brand performance. Okay, same thing for pipeline leads. You can even do this with, if you have very long sales cycles, you can do this with direct traffic, brand search traffic and volume as well. Okay, so again, baseline revenue and pipeline, which is the result of those things that are not tied to a specific activity, again, like Google Ads discount, short-term activities. Another one here, profitability. Okay, so profitability, which is again a function largely of being able to charge more. Very good thing to track. This is long term, right? So tracking profitability over the long term, very, very helpful. Brand search volume. Again, if you're spending money and more money consistently on brand marketing and you're spending a little bit more year over year and your brand search volume continues to go up, I mean, there's no world where that's not impacted by brand marketing. There's just not, right? Like, yeah, some of it might be referral traffic that gets categorized as direct later or brand search volume later. But the point is, that's another really, really good metric to use. Then we can get into things like unaided awareness, brand recall, brand association. So there are actually ways that you can calculate the category entry points that your brand is associated with. That's a little advanced, and you can do it if you have the budget. But the beautiful thing here is that you can have metrics that tail, or I was going to say scale. I combine scale and tailor. These metrics can be tailored to where your business is. Okay, so if you're a startup, there are metrics that you can use for free in a Google Sheet that can measure this stuff for you or give you a good enough idea. Then, as you grow and you get bigger, you can get more sophisticated. But you can use these metrics. You can choose, you can hand select which ones you want to measure based on where your business is. This is a really important point too. You don't need fancy tools at a certain point, or always. You don't need them. They're helpful, like an MMM solution or something like that, but you don't necessarily need them. Well, with that marathon, I have reached the end of today's episode. I hope that you have got something from it. That is always my hope. As I say too, in basically every episode that I record, number one, if you want to be a guest, just DM me. I'd love to talk, do these episodes with someone that isn't me, gets kind of lonely, and I'm not very nice to myself. And number two is if you disagree, right? Again, come on the show. Let's talk it out. If you think that I'm wrong about ROI, this is the thing. Like, I change my mind on things, and when I think about where I was in my career 5 years ago, the stuff I believed, I totally disagree with now. Okay, so we're all human beings who are subject to the environment, which means that if we're being honest, intellectually honest, we're going to change our mind when we see new things in the environment and when we can think about things in a different way. So I might change my mind on ROI. I've never said that I won't. I just think that the arguments that I subscribe to are superior to the arguments I used to subscribe to. It's really quite straightforward. That said, if you disagree, come on the show. We'll just talk about it. Because at the end of the day, ideas are not people. Who you are, and sometimes I think I should start a philosophy podcast. Maybe that's a little cringe, but who you are is not the things that rattle around in your head all day. Who you are, yourself, is different from your ideas, and it's different from the stuff that you believe in. It's different from your opinions on ROI. So just a reminder that this stuff is not personal. With that, thank you very much for listening. Much appreciated. Also, if you could please do me a huge, huge favor, if this is valuable for you, only if, please rate it and please share it. I'd really appreciate it. Otherwise, until next time, all of the best to you.